Outside the busy aisles of Greenfield Supermarket in Charlotte, North Carolina, a rookie officer's overconfidence would cost him dearly. Officer Garrett Mills had been on the force for barely 8 months, and this was supposed to be his moment. His first solo arrest. What he didn't know was that his impatience and hunger to prove himself would lead to one of the most humiliating mistakes of his career. The person he wrongfully accused and handcuffed in front of dozens of shoppers wasn't just an ordinary citizen. She was someone whose courtroom authority would soon remind him exactly why assumptions and prejudice have no place in law enforcement.
Ma'am, I need your ID right now. You're being detained for shoplifting.
Shoplifting? What are you talking about? I paid for everything I bought.
Someone saw you steal. You need to cooperate or you're making this worse.
Garrett Mills woke up that Tuesday morning with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in weeks. After 8 months of riding along with senior officers, taking notes and watching from the sidelines, today was different. Today he was finally cleared for solo patrol. No more babysitting. No more second guessing. Just him, his badge, and the streets of Charlotte. He stood in front of his bathroom mirror that morning, adjusting his uniform collar, rehearsing what he might say during his first arrest. He had imagined this day since the academy, and now it was here. Now, before we get into how this disaster unfolded, we want to take a moment to thank you for being here. Your support means everything to us, and we're grateful you chose to spend your time with this story. So let's connect. Where in the world are you watching from right now? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if this is your first time here, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and leave a like. We've got plenty more stories like this one, and we'd love to have you along for the ride. Now, let's get back to Garrett's nightmare. His shift started at noon. The sun was already beating down hard when he pulled his patrol car out of the precinct parking lot. Garrett drove through his assigned district with his windows down, scanning every corner, every storefront, every face. He wanted action. He needed to prove he belonged. His training officer had warned him during their last ride together, patience is everything. Wait for the right moment. Don't rush. But Garrett wasn't interested in waiting. He was ready now. By mid-afternoon, his radio had been quiet. A few routine calls came through, but nothing that required his response. He circled through residential blocks, checked in at a community center, and grabbed a coffee at a gas station. Still nothing. The anticipation was starting to turn into frustration. He began to wonder if his first solo shift would end without a single noteworthy moment. That thought bothered him more than it should have. Then, at exactly 3:15, his radio crackled to life. A call came in from Greenfield Supermarket on the east side of town. Possible shoplifting in progress. Security requested police assistance. Garrett's pulse quickened. He grabbed the radio and responded immediately, confirming he was 2 minutes away. This was it. His moment. He flipped on his lights and pressed the gas pedal harder than necessary. The supermarket wasn't far, but he wanted to get there fast. Wanted to show he was responsive, eager, reliable. When he pulled into the parking lot, he saw nothing out of the ordinary. Shoppers pushed carts toward their cars. A few people lingered near the entrance. Everything looked calm, but Garrett's adrenaline was already pumping. He stepped out of his cruiser, adjusted his belt, and walked toward the store with his chest out and his jaw set. He didn't know it yet, but his need to prove himself was about to collide with a reality check he would never forget. Garrett pushed through the automatic doors and immediately spotted the security guard near the customer service desk. The guard, a middle-aged man named Tom, looked more confused than alarmed. He waved Garrett over with a hesitant gesture, the kind that suggested he wasn't entirely sure the situation required police involvement. But Garrett didn't pick up on that. He saw a security guard flagging him down, and in his mind, that meant action. Tom explained the situation in a low voice. A woman had been seen near the self-checkout area, and another shopper claimed she saw her place items in her bag without scanning them. The witness had pointed out a woman in a navy blazer and white blouse, now standing near the produce section, examining a display of oranges. Tom admitted he hadn't seen the alleged theft himself. He was relaying what someone else reported. He suggested maybe they should review the security footage first, just to be sure. Garrett barely heard him. His eyes were already locked on the woman Tom had pointed out. She looked composed, professional even, with her hair pulled back neatly and a leather handbag slung over her shoulder. She didn't look like someone who had just committed a crime, but Garrett had been taught in the academy that criminals come in all forms. Appearances mean nothing. He thanked Tom quickly and started walking toward her, his hand instinctively resting near his belt. He didn't stop to think. He didn't ask Tom to pull up the cameras. He didn't take a moment to observe her behavior or gather more information. In his mind, he had a witness report, a suspect in sight, and a duty to act. That was enough. His training officer's voice echoed faintly in the back of his mind. Slow down, gather facts, don't assume. But Garrett pushed it aside. He wasn't going to look weak on his first solo call. He wasn't going to hesitate when action was needed. As he approached, the woman glanced up and noticed him. Her expression remained calm, almost curious. She set down the orange she had been inspecting and turned slightly toward him, as if expecting him to walk past. But Garrett didn't walk past. He stopped directly in front of her, his posture stiff, his tone already edged with authority. He asked for her identification and informed her that she was being detained for suspected shoplifting. The woman blinked, clearly taken aback. She asked what he was talking about. Garrett repeated himself, louder this time, as if volume would somehow validate his accusation. A few nearby shoppers turned to look. The woman's calm began to shift into something else, not panic, but disbelief. She asked if there had been some mistake. Garrett told her there was no mistake. Someone saw her steal. She needed to cooperate. But what Garrett didn't realize was that he had just made the biggest mistake of his career, and there was no taking it back now. The woman stood perfectly still, her expression shifting from confusion to quiet frustration. She asked Garrett calmly what exactly she was being accused of taking. He didn't have an answer. He hadn't asked. He simply repeated that a witness reported seeing her place items in her bag without paying. She looked down at her handbag, then back at him, and asked if he wanted to search it. Garrett told her that wasn't the point. The point was that she needed to come with him and sort this out properly. She refused to move, not in defiance, but in principle. She told him she had done nothing wrong and that she wasn't going anywhere until someone explained what was happening. She asked to speak with the store manager. She asked if there was security footage. She asked reasonable questions, the kind any innocent person would ask. But Garrett heard them as resistance. He had been trained to recognize non-compliance, and in his mind, that's what this was. He stepped closer, his voice dropping into that firm, authoritative tone officers use when they want control. He told her she could either cooperate now or make things harder for herself. He warned her that resisting would only add charges. The woman's jaw tightened. She wasn't raising her voice. She wasn't making a scene. But she also wasn't backing down. She told him she was a professional, that she had rights, and that she deserved to be treated with respect. Garrett heard the word rights and assumed she was one of those people, the kind who film police and make everything difficult. Without asking for permission, without giving her another chance to explain, Garrett reached for his handcuffs. The woman took a step back, her eyes widening. She told him he was making a serious mistake. She urged him to stop and think, but Garrett was already committed. He grabbed her wrist, spun her around, and pulled her arms behind her back. The metal cuffs clicked into place. The sound echoed through the produce aisle like a gunshot. Shoppers stopped mid-step. A mother covered her child's eyes. An elderly man shook his head in disbelief. Someone pulled out their phone and started recording. The woman didn't struggle. She didn't scream. She stood there with her hands cuffed behind her back, staring straight ahead, her breathing slow and deliberate. She said his name, Officer Mills, reading it off his badge. She told him she would remember it. Garrett ignored her. He radioed dispatch to let them know he had a suspect in custody and was bringing her in. As he guided her toward the front of the store, the crowd began to murmur. A few people shouted at him, asking what she had done. Others recorded from multiple angles. Garrett kept his eyes forward, trying to project confidence, but inside a small knot of doubt was beginning to form. Something about the way she carried herself, the way she spoke, the way everyone was reacting. It didn't feel right, but he couldn't turn back now. He had already made the arrest. All he could do was follow through and hope he was right. By the time Garrett reached the front entrance, a small crowd had gathered near the exit. Word had spread quickly through the store. People whispered to each other, craning their necks to get a better look. Some held up their phones, filming every second. Garrett tried to ignore them, but the weight of their stares pressed down on him. He kept his grip firm on the woman's arm as he walked her through the automatic doors and into the parking lot. The woman remained silent. She didn't plead. She didn't argue. She simply walked with her head held high, her posture straight despite the handcuffs biting into her wrists. That composure unnerved Garrett more than he wanted to admit. Most people he had seen arrested during his training reacted with panic, anger, or tears. But this woman showed none of that. She moved with a dignity that felt almost rehearsed, as if she had been in situations like this before and knew exactly how to handle herself. Garrett opened the back door of his patrol car and guided her inside. He shut the door and took a breath, glancing back at the growing number of onlookers recording from the sidewalk. His radio buzzed. Dispatch asked for an update. He reported that the suspect was in custody and he was preparing to transport her to the precinct for processing. Dispatch acknowledged and went silent. Garrett stood there for a moment, staring at the roof of his car, trying to shake the nagging feeling crawling up his spine. Before he could get into the driver's seat, the store manager came rushing out. A tall woman in her 50s with glasses and a name tag that read Patricia. She looked flustered, almost frantic. She called out to Garrett and jogged toward him, waving her hand. Garrett stopped, annoyed. He didn't have time for this. He had a suspect to book. But Patricia was insistent. She told him they had just reviewed the security footage. Every second of it. The woman he had in custody hadn't stolen anything. Garrett felt his stomach drop. He asked her to repeat that. Patricia said it again, slower this time, as if speaking to someone hard of hearing. The footage showed the woman walking through the store, picking up a few items, scanning them at self-checkout, paying with her credit card, and placing the receipt in her purse. She didn't skip a single item. There was no theft. The witness who reported it must have been mistaken or confused. Patricia looked at Garrett with a mixture of pity and concern. She asked if he wanted to see the footage himself. Garrett's throat went dry. He glanced back at the patrol car where the woman sat quietly in the back seat, her eyes staring straight ahead through the window. His mind raced. If there was no theft, then what was he doing? He had handcuffed an innocent woman in front of dozens of witnesses. He had ignored her request to review the footage. He had dismissed her calm explanations as lies. And now the evidence proved she was telling the truth all along. He asked Patricia if she was absolutely certain. She nodded. Completely certain. She even offered to print out the footage and provide a written statement. Garrett's hands began to tremble slightly. He turned back toward the car, trying to figure out what to do next. He could uncuff her, apologize, and let her go. But the damage was already done. The crowd was still filming. The story was already spreading. And he had a sinking feeling that this woman wasn't going to let this go quietly. He opened the back door, his voice barely steady, and told her there had been a misunderstanding. The woman looked up at Garrett with an expression that was neither angry nor relieved. It was measured, controlled, as if she had expected this exact moment. She asked him what kind of misunderstanding. Garrett fumbled for words. He told her the store had reviewed the footage and confirmed she hadn't taken anything. He said she was free to go. He reached forward to uncuff her, but she pulled back slightly, just enough to stop him. She told him she wasn't going anywhere until she understood exactly what had just happened. She wanted to know why he had approached her in the first place. She wanted to know why he hadn't checked the footage before handcuffing her. She wanted to know why he had ignored every word she said. Garrett didn't have good answers. He muttered something about following protocol and responding to a witness report. The woman shook her head slowly. She told him that wasn't protocol. That was laziness. That was arrogance. Garrett finally removed the handcuffs. The woman rubbed her wrists, red marks visible where the metal had pressed into her skin. She stepped out of the patrol car and stood face to face with him in the parking lot. The crowd was still watching. Phones were still recording. Garrett could feel the heat rising in his face. He apologized, his voice stiff and mechanical. The woman didn't acknowledge it. Instead, she reached into her handbag and pulled out a slim leather wallet. She opened it and held up an identification card. Garrett squinted at it, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. It wasn't a driver's license. It was a government-issued ID with an official seal. The name read Helena Voss. The title beneath it read, Magistrate Judge Mecklenburg County District Court. Garrett's blood turned to ice. He stared at the card, then at her face, then back at the card. His mouth opened, but no words came out. Judge Voss let the weight of the moment settle before speaking again. She told him she had tried to tell him who she was. She had asked him to slow down and verify the facts. She had requested to see the footage. She had done everything a reasonable person should do when wrongfully accused. But he hadn't listened. He had been too eager, too impatient, too convinced of his own authority to consider that he might be wrong. And now, he would have to live with the consequences of that choice. Garrett's hands hung uselessly at his sides. He tried to apologize again, but the words felt hollow even as they left his mouth. Judge Voss told him an apology wasn't enough. She told him she would be filing a formal complaint with his department. She would be requesting a full review of his conduct. And she would be making sure this incident was documented so that it never happened to anyone else. She wasn't doing this out of anger, she said. She was doing this because officers like him needed to learn that a badge doesn't give them the right to ignore basic decency and due process. Patricia, the store manager, stood nearby with a printed copy of the security footage in hand. She offered it to Judge Voss, who accepted it with a nod of thanks. Garrett watched helplessly as the judge took the evidence, placed it in her bag, and turned to walk back toward the store entrance. She paused for a moment, looked back at him, and told him he should think carefully about whether he was cut out for this job. Then she walked away, leaving Garrett standing alone in the parking lot, surrounded by strangers with cameras, knowing his career had just taken a turn he might never recover from. Garrett stood frozen in the parking lot, his mind struggling to process what had just happened. A magistrate judge. He had handcuffed a magistrate judge, not just any citizen, but someone who held authority over the very legal system he served. Someone who could make his life professionally miserable with a single phone call. The realization crashed over him like a wave, leaving him dizzy and nauseous. He looked down at his hands, still trembling, and wondered how everything had gone so wrong so quickly. The crowd began to disperse, but not before several people made sure to capture one last shot of him standing there, defeated and alone. A few muttered comments loud enough for him to hear. One man called him reckless. A woman said he should be ashamed. Garrett wanted to defend himself, to explain that he was just doing his job, but deep down he knew that wasn't true. He hadn't done his job. He had rushed to judgment. He had ignored evidence. He had let his ego override his training. His radio crackled again. Dispatch was asking for his status. Garrett picked up the handset, his voice hoarse, and reported that the situation had been resolved. No arrest. No charges. He didn't mention who the woman was. He couldn't bring himself to say it out loud yet. Dispatch acknowledged and moved on to other calls. Garrett climbed back into his patrol car and sat in the driver's seat, staring blankly through the windshield. His first solo arrest had turned into his first major mistake, and it had taken less than an hour. He drove back to the precinct in silence, his mind racing through every decision he had made. He replayed the moment he approached her, the moment he dismissed her questions, the moment he reached for the handcuffs. Each memory felt worse than the last. By the time he pulled into the precinct parking lot, his shirt was damp with sweat and his hands ached from gripping the steering wheel too tightly. Inside, he filed a brief incident report, keeping the details vague. He wrote that he had responded to a shoplifting call, detained a suspect, and released her after the store confirmed no theft had occurred. He didn't mention her title. He didn't mention the handcuffs. He didn't mention the crowd or the cameras. He signed his name at the bottom and submitted it to his sergeant's desk, hoping it would be buried under other paperwork and forgotten. But it wasn't forgotten. 2 days later, Garrett was called into his sergeant's office. Sergeant Lynn sat behind his desk with a folder open in front of him. He didn't look angry. He looked disappointed, which somehow felt worse. Lynn told Garrett that a formal complaint had been filed against him by Magistrate Judge Helena Voss. The complaint detailed every aspect of the incident, supported by security footage, witness statements, and photos of the marks left on her wrists by the handcuffs. Lynn asked Garrett to explain himself. Garrett tried. He talked about the witness report, the pressure of his first solo shift, the need to act quickly. But every excuse sounded weaker as he said it out loud. Lynn listened without interrupting, then leaned back in his chair and asked Garrett a simple question. Why didn't you check the footage first? Garrett had no answer. Lynn told him an internal investigation would be launched immediately, and until it was concluded, Garrett was to stay away from active duty. He was assigned to desk work, pending the outcome. Garrett left the office feeling like his entire future had just collapsed. The investigation took 3 weeks. During that time, Garrett reported to the precinct every day and sat at a desk filing reports and answering phones. He avoided eye contact with other officers. He ate lunch alone. He heard the whispers in the break room, saw the way people looked at him when they thought he wasn't paying attention. Word had spread quickly. Everyone knew what he had done. Some officers felt sympathy, saying it could have happened to anyone. Others were less forgiving, calling it a rookie mistake that should have never happened in the first place. The internal affairs team interviewed everyone involved. They spoke with Tom, the security guard, who admitted he had suggested reviewing the footage before approaching anyone. They spoke with Patricia, the store manager, who provided the full security video showing Judge Voss committing no crime. They spoke with several shoppers who had witnessed the arrest, many of whom had posted their videos online. By the time the clips went viral, they had been viewed hundreds of thousands of times. Local news picked up the story. Headlines read, "Rookie Officer Arrests Judge in Supermarket Mix-Up," and "Badge and Bias, When Assumptions Lead to Handcuffs." Judge Voss gave one brief statement to the press. She said she hoped the incident would serve as a reminder that everyone, regardless of position or appearance, deserves to be treated with dignity and fairness by law enforcement. She didn't call for Garrett to be fired. She didn't demand extreme punishment. She simply wanted accountability and a commitment to better training. Her measured response only made Garrett feel worse. She had every right to destroy his career, but instead she chose to use the moment as a teaching opportunity. The investigation concluded that Garrett had violated multiple department policies. He had failed to gather sufficient evidence before making an arrest. He had ignored the request to review available security footage. He had escalated a situation unnecessarily by using restraints on a cooperative individual. He had allowed personal ambition and eagerness to cloud his judgment. The report was damning, but not entirely without mercy. It acknowledged that Garrett was a rookie, that he had no prior disciplinary record, and that he had shown remorse during the investigation. His punishment was handed down on a Friday afternoon. Sergeant Lynn called him into the office one final time and read the decision aloud. Garrett was suspended without pay for 3 months. He was fined $25,000 to be paid in installments over the next year. He would be required to complete additional training on civil rights, de-escalation techniques, and implicit bias before returning to active duty. And his personnel file would permanently reflect this incident. Lynn told him he was lucky. In other departments, with other judges, this could have ended his career entirely. Garrett accepted the punishment without argument. He signed the necessary paperwork, turned in his badge and weapon, and walked out of the precinct that afternoon feeling hollow. 3 months without income, a massive fine that would take him years to fully recover from, and a reputation that would follow him for the rest of his career. He sat in his car in the parking lot and stared at the building he had been so proud to work in just weeks earlier. He thought about Judge Voss, sitting calmly in the back of his patrol car, her hands cuffed behind her back, her dignity intact even as he stripped away her freedom. He thought about the way she had looked at him when she showed him her identification, not with anger, but with something worse, disappointment. She had given him every chance to do the right thing, and he had ignored her. Now he would spend the next 3 months thinking about that choice, and the rest of his career trying to prove he had learned from it. The 3 months passed slowly. Garrett spent his days working odd jobs to cover his bills, the fine hanging over him like a shadow he couldn't escape. He picked up shifts at a warehouse, delivered groceries on weekends, and borrowed money from his parents to make rent. Every dollar he earned felt heavier than the last, a constant reminder of the cost of his arrogance. He avoided social media, but he knew the videos were still out there, still circulating, still being shared as cautionary tales in law enforcement forums and community activist groups. He used the time to think, really think, about why he had been so desperate to make that arrest, about why he hadn't listened when Judge Voss asked him to slow down, about the assumptions he had made without even realizing it. He enrolled in the required training courses early, attending workshops on implicit bias and community policing. He sat in rooms with other officers and listened to stories from people who had been wrongfully stopped, searched, and arrested. Some of those stories sounded uncomfortably similar to his own. One evening, near the end of his suspension, Garrett wrote a letter. Not an official statement, but a personal one. He addressed it to Judge Voss. In it, he apologized again, but this time with more honesty. He admitted that he had been more concerned with proving himself than with doing the right thing. He acknowledged that he had treated her as guilty before giving her a fair chance to explain. He told her he understood now that a badge wasn't a license to stop thinking, and that authority without accountability was just power misused. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He simply wanted her to know that her decision to file the complaint had changed him in ways that mattered. He never sent the letter. He kept it folded in his wallet, a private reminder of the person he didn't want to be anymore. When his suspension ended, Garrett returned to duty a different officer. He was quieter, more cautious, less eager to jump into action without thinking. His colleagues noticed the change. Some respected it. Others wondered if he had lost his edge. But Garrett didn't care about their opinions anymore. He cared about doing the job right, even if it meant moving slower, asking more questions, and admitting when he didn't have all the answers. Judge Voss never spoke to him again. He saw her once months later, walking into the courthouse as he was leaving after testifying in an unrelated case. She didn't recognize him, or if she did, she didn't acknowledge it. Garrett didn't approach her. He simply watched her disappear through the doors, carrying herself with the same calm dignity she had shown that day in the supermarket. He wondered if she ever thought about him, or if he was just another case in a career full of them. Either way, he owed her more than an apology. He owed her a better version of himself. The fine took him 14 months to pay off completely. By the time he made the final payment, Garrett had been back on patrol for nearly a year. He still made mistakes, but they were different now, smaller, more honest. The kind that came from trying hard rather than not trying at all. He never forgot what it felt like to stand in that parking lot, handcuffs in his hand, realizing he had destroyed someone's dignity for no reason other than his own impatience. That memory stayed with him, not as a weight, but as a guide. So here's the question worth asking. Do you think 3 months and $25,000 was enough? Or does real accountability require something more? Maybe the bigger question is this. How many officers are out there right now making the same mistake Garrett made, but without the cameras, without the judge, without the consequences? Justice was served in this case, but only because the right person was wronged at the right time. What about everyone else? If this story made you think, made you feel something, or reminded you why accountability matters, go ahead and leave a comment below. Let us know your thoughts. Do you think Garrett learned his lesson, or should the punishment have been harsher? And don't forget to like this video and subscribe if you haven't already. We've got more stories like this one, and we'd love to have you along for the next one. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.